So that was it, I guess, for her end. So if you want to take it away.
Just to add, Chairman, in terms of when we initially looked at the nuisance abatement and strengthening it back in '08, we looked at we had a criminal activity nuisance structure in place that was was lacking in terms of enforceability and, and really kind of had too much connectivity to the court and to making sure that a conviction was actually obtained, an arrest was made before a criminal activity would kick in. We got away from that, and we went towards this new route here where really all we needed is a police, fire, animal control, building intervention, or any other city department intervention into a situation. It went from either citation or arrest or conviction to either citation, arrest, conviction, or just plain documentation by a city department. So if you had a city department, a police officer would go out and maybe didn't rise to the level of an actual arrest or an actual citation, but they'd been out there 3-4 times for the same type of nuisance activity. They would document that in CAD reports, and the police have what's called a CAD report that documents their activities, the police officers' activities of being called out to a certain address. Every CAD report doesn't necessarily generate a police report or a citation or an arrest, but we do have documentation of the police being called to a particular address through the CAD system. And frankly, that's where I think Chief Malley is getting a lot of the information, tracking the, looking at an address and maybe remembering, hey, we've been out there twice in the last month or so, going back and capturing those activities and forwarding them to Ms. Rocco. There's the question about increasing maybe the penalties, and I just want to reinforce the fact that these aren't really penalties, they're not fines. What the city's trying to do with this ordinance is to recapture our expenses and our expenditure in reacting and continuously reacting to the same nuisance activities over and over again. This is not a fine, so these are defined minimum costs of the police and other city departments actually responding. Our tax money goes to for police and fire and the rest to respond. But when you have a constant response to the same problem, the same property owner, then this ordinance seeks to recapture some of those costs.
So if you don't mind, sure. Just by way of example, I know we got to go, I'm sorry.
No.
These are not, you may be surprised by the amounts that we're seeking to collect. Mm-hmm. So just as an example from the first page of this spreadsheet, these were the payments that were due. $255.34, $289.82, $407.62, $589.86. There's no set dollar amount. It's all calculated based on police activity at that particular address. So it really is not in the nature of a fine. And I think that's very important to distinguish, because when you do head down the path of fines, then you start to blur the distinction between a civil enforcement action and a criminal action, which affords a defendant, or in this case a property owner, many more layers of defenses and rights. In this case, we wanted swift civil action, and this is how you can do it.
And that is really important.
Right? Yeah, correct. The current ordinance, as it is, covers both residential and commercial, as you see, have heard from the list here being recited. So we do have residential and commercial. And what this new one does, the current one, that the other one didn't, is expand, and it was kind of limiting language in that the activity, the old ordinance read the activity must occur on the property. So if you had somebody who would walk off the property and say in the middle of the street or across the street and did something foolish, vandalism or noise or whatever, it was tough to draw, to say, well, the property owner could come in and say, well, that really technically it didn't happen on my property. So what we included was a 1,000 feet radius, that if we can tie back the nuisance activity back to that property, we can capture that nuisance activity and be able to recapture some of our costs in responding to those nuisance activities from that property. For Shaker Heights, what was the first one? They went 300 feet. Council passed a 1,000 feet with regards to Lakewood back in 2008.
And I don't think that was without precedent.
No, Shaker Heights had 300 feet.
But I'm not,
radius.
I don't know if we are I think there might be another municipality that goes that far.
No, I'm not saying we're the only one. We just, in terms of comparison.
Yeah.
Comparison with the original criminal activity nuisance, that basically we had property owners come in with meets and bounds and say, no, it didn't happen on my property. It happened on the parking lot right next door to us. So technically, you can't collect. So we tried to alleviate that situation.
Well, and I was just going to say, so that was in 2009 that we increased the area to 1,000 feet?
Yeah.
That's really
past
2008.
December
Sorry.
2008.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a really important part that I'm glad you just reminded me of, because that frequently happens, particularly with rental properties. Councilwoman Smith, do you mind if I go into questions while you're doing that explanation?
Thanks for all the information about, what you've seen in terms of frequency of reports from the public. My concern, though, is that obviously the former council person had a concern and was observing something that caused him to write this letter. So I'm wondering right now if there's some sort of disconnect between the way that things get reported or what it is that qualifies a property to be added to the list that Andrea keeps. I feel like there's maybe something a little bit subjective in terms of the police department deciding to make a recommendation that a property should be added to that list, or that the housing department makes a recommendation. I'm curious to know, are there multiple people who are making these decisions? Could we possibly not be communicating with each other? Is it possible that some properties are falling through the cracks because of the way that we
It seems
monitor
that
this?
these come to me from a variety of different departments.
Right.
First of all, they also come from residents. Residents are becoming more and more aware of this ordinance that you all passed. And they will call and say, geez, I saw the police at my next door neighbor's house twice in the last 2 weeks. And then that may generate me asking the chief, have the police been out here? We also, these complaints are generated by our building department as far as high grass and weeds and garbage from the Board of Health, the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, on certain issues there. And I don't want to say it's subjective, but you do have to be aware of what's going on, and as you know, every department is very busy. I try to cross-reference our different reports that we receive. So, for instance, if there is a report from building on high grass and weeds, I try to look at that and then compare it to what we may already have from the police department. Now, also council people will email me or pick up the phone and call about issues that you hear from your constituents, and I also cross-reference that list. I keep a separate list that maybe has not been initiated into the criminal nuisance process yet, but if there's one complaint and then all of a sudden we have a misdemeanor drug arrest, that's going to be enough to trigger the 510 nuisance law. I think Mayor Summers probably remembers that we have seen some of the same business establishments receiving violation after violation, and I believe Law Director Butler has brought those up already, and those are some concerns. You can see them on the list, the ones that the police tend to go to on a regular basis. But you will see just by looking at the addresses that oftentimes, and I think this is great, there's a very positive effort to try and clean up the situation.
I don't mean to suggest that we've got all of this figured out. I think it was sort of a happy circumstance for me to find out that there really weren't a great deal of repeat offenders on the list. I was pleased to see that. Was I pleased to see that there were 222 properties on the list? No, but I was pleased to see that there weren't many repeat offenders, which just suggests to me that either that first or that second letter, generally speaking, is doing the trick. But it's certainly something that, I mean, in this, frankly, this communication in this committee meeting help us do this. It's certainly something we have to continue to monitor to make sure that there aren't properties there aren't owners who are just writing the check and continuing to wreak havoc on a particular neighborhood. Mayor, we're talking about your communication.
Do we have any further questions or comments on this? And we can bring this back to housing again, Monique. I understand what you're asking, and the difference now from years ago is that we have data, which we did not have before, and we have Andrea Rocco, whom we didn't have before. Two big pieces. And if Jeff Ashby's your first call, frequently Andrea can be your second call, or the other way around, depending on what it is in your neighborhoods that you're trying to get to.
Sure.
Yes.
If I could. And Andrea and I speak routinely. If she's, again, sees an arrest or property, she'll email me and say, what do you have on this location? Subsequently, also, if we have a couple of grass violations within a 12-month period, or if we see grass and trash violations within a 12-month period, I will forward that information to her. So again, we do cross-reference that. So, and if I'm not mistaken, I think from 2009 to 2010, I think the first year was approximately 168 nuisance letters went out. So I think, again, the program's working, and because obviously it's been cut in half basically for 2010. I think it's because the word has gotten out and people are paying heed to what it is to have good tenants and be a good steward of the property.
Any other questions? Not a closed issue, but thank you both. Thank you all. Thank you everyone from all the departments for this. We can bring this back to housing. So there will not be any recommended action on this, but I do move to adjourn. Do I have a second? Second. So moved. Seconded by Councilman Smith. Housing Committee is adjourned at 6:33. Can we begin?